welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Steve Marks, Chair of the Board of the Metropolitan Club and President of Hannah News Service. It's great to see all the happy, smart faces here today. Today's forum, Smart Jobs for a Smart City, is sponsored by BDO and Regionomics. Each are represented by many friends and associates here today. Won't you please help me thank them? Concern about the loss of jobs due to technology like robotics and artificial intelligence has ranged from gloom to doom. The reality is that technology has vastly remade the landscape of work many times over the years. The shift from agriculture to manufacturing in the early 1900s is just one example. What's different this time? Might technological advances cause a shift in employment that creates more jobs? What will change look like, and how can we prepare? We have several local leaders here today who are considering these questions. Please welcome President and CEO of the Workforce Development Board of Central Ohio, Lisa Patt-McDaniel. President and CEO of the PAST Foundation, Annalies Corbin. President and CEO of United Way of Central Ohio, Lisa Courtice. And our host, the Interim Director of the City of Columbus Department of Development, Michael Stevens. Michael, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you, Steve. Wow, what a great turnout on a beautiful day here in America's Opportunity City. So welcome, Columbus to Columbus. I am really pleased to be here with these thought leaders in our community around how are we going to address the future of work. I've had the privilege of serving and working with the Smart Columbus team over the last couple years. And Smart Columbus was an effort where we came together as a community because we recognize there's such a significant disruption in technology occurring in the transportation and mobility space that we wanted to get ahead of that. We wanted to understand that. We wanted to make sure we are addressing the needs so we can position Columbus and the region and the state of Ohio in a spot so we could continue to grow and thrive. We talk a lot at Smart Columbus about how we were once, Columbus at the turn of the century was once the buggy-making capital of the world. And in 10 years, that industry got wiped out. I mean, there was a lot of upside to the automotive industry coming in and the connection and driving industry through with the automobile. But we looked at this next change and disruption in technology around transportation and recognized we want to stay ahead of that so we can adjust to the changing needs that industry has for our workforce. So that's why I'm encouraged to be here with these community leaders to have this discussion. The other great thing about these three is I'm just pretty much going to hand it off and sit here and watch and listen to them talk and help guide the discussion. So it's going to be great. You pretty much heard all you're going to hear from me. Thank you for not applauding. So let's just start off with kind of a intro question around the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we see going forward in the future of work or what's required now. So if you could each share, either a position you recently hired for in your organization or maybe someone you've mentored, and how have those knowledge, skills, and abilities around that position changed over the last 10 years to where you're at now? Or if you're mentoring someone, how are you advising them that they need to position themselves to be competitive going forward?
Who wants to start? That's you. Oh, that's how this is going to work. When I think about people that we've recently hired and people that I have had the opportunity to mentor, I think about the fact that they really have to understand that where they are now and what they know now is not necessarily going to get them to their future jobs in the future. Because things will be changing so fast. So if they aren't technologically savvy now, if they don't understand what kinds of changes we see on the horizon and how to adapt to that, if they're not resilient and able to try to look at what's coming and move towards it as opposed to being afraid of it, then their career is going to end quickly.
I would definitely agree with that. And I would say that for us at PAST as a small organization, one of the most critical things that we need are people who are not afraid to learn. And I would argue that in today and the space around thinking about the future work, if you're not willing to learn and to be an active learner every single day, you are never going to be able to succeed at the rate and pace of change that's happening. And so for us, we look for folks who can wear multiple hats at any given time. And most importantly, you have to be willing to learn and to learn new things.
We recently hired a new person to lead IT at United Way, and she had a long and successful career at a for-profit company, large one in IT, in a big department that was downsized because of advances in technology. So her job was then eliminated. And we feel she was a great find for us. My concern for her is, will she be able to stay ahead in her career working for a nonprofit? And we are, the nonprofit sector is the third largest employer, tied with hospitality in Columbus. We're a big sector, but we also pay in the lowest band of compared to other industries. And so I worry that, so we're a big sector, and are we able to train the talent for the future and for our people to compete in and out of the nonprofit sector?
So one of the buzzwords we hear a lot in talking in this space is skills gap. If we can go in the same order we started on the last question, can we talk a little bit about what is the skill? What is, when we talk about skills gap, what are we referring to, and how is that manifested here in Columbus?
Well, Annalies and I had this conversation the other day, and so I loved what she had to say, so I'm going to pass it off for you to start and talk about what we were talking about.
I try, Andy, I try.
Because one of the key skills anybody needs is to know when somebody's smarter than you. And you talked about the fact that it's not the skills gap or skills, but human skills. And I loved what you had to say, and I just think that's a good way for us to frame this answer, so if you don't mind.
Sure, well, there you go. So when we think about this, and at PAST, we spend so much time thinking about emerging workforce is sort of the way I like to sort of frame what's happening in the K-12 space. If we really want to see something transformative happen as it relates to the system of the early learning and opportunity and how that translates into the world of work or post-secondary. And so for us, it's really critically important because the reality is we can teach skills. We can all teach skills in our industries and our jobs. We have to have those willing learners, and that willing learner piece is tied to the notion that what we're really talking about here are these human skills, right? In a rapid rate and pace of change tied to technology, a lot of the conversation is around not only all the jobs that we're going to lose, but the interactions that we're going to lose. And at the end of the day, those technological evolutions are only going to be as successful as the humans that are involved in those equations, right? And so for us, we take a giant step back and say, what is it that we're trying to train for? Right? The answer is we don't know. And if we don't know what that is, then let's put in place that really solid foundation around the human skills, the ability to learn, to be adaptable, to problem solve, to collaborate, all the things that employers tell us on an everyday and ongoing basis. That's the thing I need. More than anything else, that's the thing I need.
And I so agree with that because, again, if you have those attributes, right, we can put you anywhere. Now, whether that's a job you want to do or a sector you're interested, that's a different story. But if you have those abilities, right, I've said this before up here, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, right, the ability to be creative. If you can do all those things, we can put you anywhere, and those of us who hire people can teach the skills, right? And so I completely agree with that. And if you have all those skills too, you can easily adapt, again, towards the technology that's coming. I think of the technology as coming, we always say, run to the light, run to the technology, learn it. Another thing that we had talked about then was that we know that we have baby boomers are staying in the workforce a lot longer. And baby boomers were not in school when the computer was invented. I know that because I'm a Gen Xer, and that's when computers showed up when I was in school. So, you know, we want those people with the experiences they bring to stay, but they are also going to have to keep on the edge of that technology. And so you talk at the beginning, and I'm talking at people who are more towards the end of their careers but want to continue to work. So
before you, I'm going to
I have
tweak.
an answer.
I know, so I'm going to add a little bit more to it.
Okay.
So a lot of the work we're doing, we've got to look through an equity and an access lens. From an equity perspective, are we providing those opportunities to get those skills?
Can I answer both the
Yeah,
questions?
go.
All right. So as a CMC audience member, I always thought it would be even more interesting if the people on the panel didn't agree with each other. But I happen to agree with them, so I'm gonna find something that I don't agree with. All right, make it even that much more interesting. But all right. So keep this in mind. If you have a bachelor's degree, and I know a lot of the trends are about, oh, they're not necessary, but in Franklin County, if you have a bachelor's degree, only 4.4% of us live in poverty. If you're a high school graduate, only 16.9% of us live in poverty. That's still a lot of people living in poverty. If you have less than a high school degree, 31% of us live in poverty. So you think about equity and how our schools are performing, and those schools who are serving children who are of lower income are not performing as well as those schools who are serving children from higher income zip codes. We have an equity problem, and education is the equalizer, and will close the skills gap.
there you go. Oh,
You agree?
I would not disagree with that. I mean, that is, again, one of the things that is a challenge when we're looking at workforce and what's coming over the horizon. If we talk about new technology and the people in this room, I'm guessing, have at least a high school degree for the most part, have a college degree, and have the resources either where they work in their private lives to have, you know, all those technological improvements that help make your life easier and organize your life. And then you have people who maybe don't have those opportunities and don't have the ability or don't understand how it all fits together. And now we're talking about jumping ahead in technology. And how do we make that happen? If education, if we have equity issues, and quite frankly, equity around race issues in this community, and so we already have people who aren't able to access those opportunities that pay a living wage, which is much higher than $15, by the way. We have to figure out how we even get them to where we are now and then move them up with the rest of us where we all have to go. And that's a huge challenge. But it's not one we can fail at, because if we do, we'll be sitting up here in another 5 years or sooner and be in a worse place than we are now, or a more challenging place, let's put it that way.
But we have to be brave to change that, right? Because we have to step back and acknowledge the fact that the way we're thinking about prepping folks for all of those opportunities we're not going to get there doing it the way we're doing it right now. And so thinking about the pathway and the opportunity into pathways to whatever the future of work looks like for an individual, that's the space that I would argue we have to not just roll up our sleeves and dig in, but we have to just kind of toss. You know, I get myself in trouble for this all the time, but we have to toss the way we're thinking about the sort of K-12 space. And if we rethink the way we we want to provide opportunity, I guess, at the end of the day. And so I'm arguing that we need to rethink the way we provide opportunity, right? And so instead of having, for example, high school graduation is this very low arbitrary bar that only gets you so far, right? As it relates to some of the statistics that Lisa was just sharing with us. But instead we think about the opportunity for micro-credentialing, small components that are stackable, that allow life to happen at the same time that we are able to figure out what we're passionate about, then we will have a very, very different workforce. If you've got an entire group of folks that are entering into our community, passionate about something with the skills that they need and the opportunity and experience to allow them to lead in that space, that's a game changer.
Do you know of communities that have the will to do that? Because I don't.
It's huge, right? It's absolutely huge. And there are pockets of places, right, where those sorts of workforce are thinking about the innovations changing around our education, but we're stuck inside of a set of federal and state mandates that make it very, very difficult for us to be innovative in this space. That's the reality. So the flip side, I would argue, of this is that we have to, quite frankly, figure out how to work around the constraints that we have.
That's a huge lift.
Massive.
Yeah, but you're right, but one that we have to do because, I mean, I guess the positive is if we can't think of another community that's done this, then we don't have competition yet. But as someone who used to be in economic development, and actually I could still consider myself to be in economic development doing workforce because that's the number one incentive for any company. But that gives us a great opportunity then to be that community that maybe works around in the beginning, but actually goes towards real change.
And if the charter school movement were higher performing, they would have the opportunity to be able to test these ideas. Absolutely. And that's why we have charter schools, because they were meant to test ideas to solve problems that weren't working in our traditional K through 12 system. But we haven't seen them figure that out either.
Well, I think it goes back to the same set of federal and state constraints, right? Even in a charter space that's supposed to be allowed to be innovative, the reality is we still have this set of mandates that are as old school as they come, right? They're not about today. They have no interest in today. They weren't crafted for that. And so we have to figure out where and how we can tackle that issue differently so that we can be successful, can lead the way, that will end up in policy change. It's all ends of the spectrum.
Well, and the other thing is too that I know we're pretty soon we're not going to need you, Mike.
I'm about to go sit down and have a little water. Keep going. This is great.
Here's the thing, too, is why we're trying to get that change. We have a workforce now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we have people living here now, and those jobs are coming on now.
Yeah.
And it's how do you balance this? That's a tension, and how do you do that?
But if we keep, for me, it goes back to education. And I've been doing this work for a long time, and I'm always asking, where is an urban environment where schools aren't failing? And I haven't found one. Why are we sitting here letting this happen in our country? So yes, we need to figure out the workforce today, but we're just creating another pipeline that's not prepared to do what we need them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me shift a little bit. All right, we're not shifting. No, let me, so shift a little bit on that. We're going to continue to experience growth in this community. We have more and more people coming in. It's important for us to continue to attract jobs and investment to have that growth.
Yes.
But we need to prepare that workforce, that pipeline. What jobs, if we're sitting down at the schools and we're sitting down and working on those stackable credentials, and what jobs do you see on the future in dealing and interacting with industry? What are those future smart jobs that we need to be preparing people for so we are more competitive as a community and as a region to attract investment in?
So we're currently working with Ohio State to do research on looking at what those jobs are, and we hope to roll that out here in a couple months. But some of the things we do know is that many of the core sectors we have here in Columbus now are becoming technology companies even though you may not think of them that way. So insurance, finance, those major sector here in Columbus. So when you think about traditionally, bank tellers or, underwriters in insurance, there are things that will happen there that are really probably going to be somewhat automated. Some jobs there will be able to be done by a machine, computer, and machine learn. But that's great opportunity for humans, because really the deal is when you look at these jobs, it's really about humans interacting with that technology and making the sector, the services provided, the actual work better. And so I think that many of those key sectors, another key sector here, logistics, right? There are certain jobs in logistics that are going to be automated. But it's an interaction of higher skill human beings who can think and do all those things we already talked about, that will make those companies more productive and better. And so whatever those jobs, I've been thinking a lot about it, looking at some of the research we already have done, and it seems to me that the key really is that any of the jobs we have now, there's a certain element of those that technology will be able to do and do better, and we'll all be happy about it. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, a lot of things happened that people didn't have to do that were drudgery that got taken over. And I think some of that happens now, and even though we can't envision what that means, I do know that those future jobs are going to maybe be in some of the same sectors. Not all of those sectors will need to survive here. But whatever it happens, it means that we will be in those sectors, but using technology to enhance how we provide the service or the product. That's really out there, isn't it? That doesn't really.
No, I thought that was good. How is business engaging on these conversations? I mean, it's great for the government and some are not-for-profit leaders to think about this, but to really understand where industry is going, we need business to engage. How is that happening at the workforce board level and with your organizations? And do we need more of it? What's the balance there?
Our primary business model is B2B, so we work with businesses or our customers to help engage their associates in philanthropy. And over and over again, the consistent concern as we listen to their needs is around being able to find the talent. That's their number, is finding talent. In addition to that, though, it is also around the trades. So we think about adding another 1 million people to our community and having just to build homes for those people. Who is going to build the homes? Who is going to do the work? Who's going to put the plumbing in? Who's going to do the electrical work? And so we have a small group of business leaders working together who work in the trades to talk about how can we make it cooler to be in the trades, which has a great way to earn a living, to be independent, to run your own business, and yet they just can't find young people who are interested in doing that. And I have visited different training programs where they talk about not being able to get anyone interested in welding. They have the equipment to train because they can't talk to anyone when they're in there, and they can't be on their phone. That is not okay.
Yeah, and I think that, sort of to add to that, there's a messaging problem in all of this as well, right? So, I mean, when you think about these young folks going through school and then, the possibility of, do I go on to post-secondary or do I go on into a trade? We created this bizarre artificial boundary in the way that we think about educating people, right? And so that artificial boundary has said, we're going to have all of this core content that leads to some type of post-secondary, and we've made some odd decision along the way that said, and the trades aren't post-secondary.
Right.
right? And so we've provided this mystique that for folks who want to not necessarily go on to a 2 or 4 or more advanced degree college career, that somehow that's not a viable career. And that's just not the case. And the reality of it is today, when you think about the technological shifts that are coming, the needs that we have, you know, sort of our ground floor workforce needs, it's all intertwined. And you can't really separate out one from the other. And the reality is one of the things that we've seen at the Pass Foundation through some of the workforce lenses and programs that we've built is that we've been very, very deliberate about trying, right? Because part of it is around the experiment. How can we actually make the shift? Well, we've got to try it to know, of intermingling what happens in post-secondary based on graduate degree requirement and retainment to actual technical skill and technicians. And where and how do those things intersect? And reality is they intersect at every moment along the way. It's just where you peel off the credential and you apply it to working right now. And, you know, part of that for us comes from circling back around to an earlier question about, you know, what's coming and what do those jobs look like. You know, I think Columbus is very well positioned because of all the startup that happens here. In fact, it's one of the things that I think makes us a really, really exciting city. And we can learn so much from the folks that are working in the startup space because they're out there not just on the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, but sometimes they're in the crazy edge, right? But the reality is crazy edge is the space where we're going to get the next set of innovations that are going to drive our decision making that are going to impact workforce.
How's the system set up as we have individuals re-entering back into society if they've served some time and they're being re-entered back in? What's the system like to accommodate the training they need to be prepared for these jobs of the future? I mean, is that being considered?
Well, so here's another dream for you. If someone is spending time incarcerated, plenty of time to be trained. Plenty of time to be trained. I read about a program in New York, and I've talked with other people in the community about it, where they were training while people were incarcerated. When the person was 6 months out, they actually just started going to work. Just their apartment was a different apartment than some of their colleagues. And when they were released on Saturday. On Monday, they went to the job they've been working at for the last 6 months. The beauty of it was they weren't paying for their apartment. They were able to save their money. So on Monday, they went back to work, and then that night, they went out and bought their Ford truck, and they had the money for down payment, or not a down payment probably, but the first month's rent, and actually went on about their business. And certainly they had a parole officer. Certainly, you know, there were those kinds of monitoring things that some people have to do. But the people they worked with were really none the wiser unless they chose to share it. And I think that I think we need to do more of that. I mean, we know that people have some time and they have aspirations. Many times, people who have been incarcerated have plenty of time, more than you and I, to think about where they want to go, what they want to be, what mistake they might have made in their past life, and how they want to get out of it. And tend to be some of the people that I've interacted with personally. This isn't a generality, this is personal. People that I've worked with and know who are the best employees ever because of that. And so I think what we need to do is we need to reach back, and employers just need to be more open and stop, you know, making people wear the scarlet A that none of you want to wear either for any mistake you've made. And let's get a really great source of people who can do the work and have a lot of people to train, or a lot of time to train into some of these positions. So, I mean, there are a lot of organizations that we interact with who are working with people. There are some credentials that people can get now. They're probably more focused around the trades. But there's a lot of other training and credentials that could be offered where there's in-demand jobs on the outside.
We have strong partners in the space of reentry. Alvis is one of them. So doing great work. And we have seen more and more businesses, because of our strong economy and low unemployment, willing to be more flexible with their hiring practices. But we still work with some that are reticent to make changes. But it really is about a hiring standard and practice that needs to be more flexible, to be more inclusive.
And I think that's really important as we focus on prosperity for all, and how do we bring that equity to all of our residents in our community. Shifting a little bit again, so the disruption in the economy is we've got kind of the gig economy, the gig workforce. Unfortunately, that doesn't always result in a living wage. So I'm going to start with you, Lisa, and put you on the spot, and since we're going to be going to audience questions here in a couple minutes, what are we doing to set up for families so they have, if they're working through this gig economy, there's also the ability and services in place to lift them up to be prepared for other jobs of the future, so they can afford to live and work in the same community?
Say it again.
No, that was, okay, I rambled. Really, so we've got folks who aren't making a living wage, and some of the disruption in the economy is the gig and living wage. What can we do to help lift them up, to prepare them for other jobs that possibly could be paying them more and give them the ability to afford to live and work in the community, as opposed to being 45 miles out or 60 miles out?
It's so complex. So the family that you're describing, who doesn't have the income needed to meet their expenses, or is a car repair away from really being in trouble, not being able to afford their rent or something like that, requires a complex set of supports, which is why we have our nonprofit sector. So it's rare that they just go to one nonprofit for something, right? They may visit the food pantry, but they also need perhaps mental health, after-school programming, early child care, health care. So it's complex. I think that we've done a better job with making credentials a stackable credential has made a big difference, I think, because it's hard for people who are living day to day with worries day to day to think, how do I invest in a year program? That seems like 10 years for them. And so being able to have regular wins, programs that offer those regular small wins so that you feel yourself growing. But it takes a strong nonprofit sector, which is the whole goal of United Way, is to create that sector so that people can tap into the many complex to meet their complex needs. But there's not a silver bullet,
So we are partnered with the PASS Foundation on a model actually that is potentially a complex answer to a complex problem. As I heard Matt Havash say to my class yesterday, actually, complex problems require complex solutions. But why don't you tell them about what we're doing with the James? This is just, I think, a really potential answer
And this
model.
is my opportunity to not agree.
Oh, okay.
Right?
And this is my opportunity to encourage people to line up.
Okay. All right. I want to hear how you don't agree with this.
I'm losing my opportunities. All right.
So back to this question about how can we very, very quickly onboard folks to be able to take advantage of opportunity. And so after a couple of sessions of working with Workforce Development Board around some programming in the summer with students who were either just about to graduate or had recently graduated, and sort of where can we get them some stackable skills, we ran a Smart Cities program 2 summers in a row. And as a result of sort of some of the things that we learned from that, we had an opportunity when we were contacted by the James in their nursing and healthcare program. And the James, the system-wide in sort of their entry-level healthcare was reporting to us that they had, on average, 2,000 plus jobs a month that they can't fill. They're very, very entry-level, but has tremendous potential if you could get into that pipeline. But we know that the barriers to access, oftentimes, whether it be transportation, childcare, you name it, it gets really, really difficult. sometimes to even take advantage of the fact that you could have this job or even know what that job was or entailed. And so we partnered up together with the James and the Workforce Development Board to craft a program that allowed recent high school graduates who may or may not have earned the traditional high school graduation certificate, maybe it was an adult ed option, a variety of different things, who wanted to go into healthcare to be able to spend 12 weeks with the Pass Foundation workforce and with the James. In the first 6 weeks, these folks, in this case it was 7 young women who made it through all the initial interviewing process, a little tiny pilot. 7 people's not very many, but we want to make sure that we're doing right by these folks and by the partnerships. And so those folks spend a very, very compressed 6 weeks. We get them all the way through an STNA certificate. If they don't have their high school diploma, they get their high school diploma. They make it all the way through their background checks and their medical checks, and they learn how to write a resume, and they actually apply for the job and part of the program at the James. And so if they successfully complete the 6 weeks for the STNA stackable cert, then they get entry and are hired by the James as a full-time employee with benefits, with the options for post-secondary and a scaffolded job career, and spend the next 6 weeks earning their PCA certificate. So in 12 weeks, 2 industry stackable certs that allow you to go to work immediately. We're really, really proud of that. And actually, Jim Bruner in the back of the room is running that.
I just want to call out Lawrence Jackson of our staff, who was on our side making it happen and making sure these young women showed up ready to go, like daily and hourly and maybe even by the minute. So this is small. This is small. Can you disagree with this, Lisa?
I can't disagree, but we regularly hear about I do not mean to diminish the success. Yeah. It's very exciting. But I rarely see something that then goes to scale.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah.
That's a problem, right? How do we go to scale? And it's expensive.
It is expensive, right? And we've been having this internal conversation. I'm looking at all the Workforce Development Board and past folks that are out there. How do we go from this small pilot? It's awesome, it's great, but 6 or 7 young women suddenly in the workforce, office services, that's a win. But you know, there's almost 2,000 more jobs, and we've got people who want to work in this community. So what do? We don't know the answer to this, by the way, but we're trying to figure it out, taking all suggestions.
Well, I've got a number of questions, additional questions, so I'm going to go queue up and get in line with the rest of the group. So as everyone knows, it's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. So please state your name and ask your questions, and please avoid editorial comments. And remember, questions end with a question mark. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox with the Pizzuti Companies, and my question has to do with the Rise Together blueprint for Franklin County that was announced a few months back. So my question is, what do each of you think about that blueprint, and what should people in this room be doing to help advance it?
Well, I'm happy to be on the advisory council, and we have the chairs of the work of this council in the room with us today. Trudy Bartley and Matt Habash are here, so they can certainly answer your questions as well. But it does it's a 120-point plan, and it has 4 primary goals, and you can start by reading it. It's available on the website and on the county's website. That's a first start, especially just the executive summary, so that you understand that this plan was built by going into the community and talking with people with lived experiences, as well as talking with community leaders. And the plan will be, it's going to be different. There's going to be an innovation hub that's created, where as a community we can test big ideas for solving for these issues.
I was part of the original group that worked to create that plan. Me and about 50 other people were smarter than me. And I think that the plan is a really good start, and I think the innovation center that will be established to start to test some of these ideas is going to be paramount and make us that community that everybody else has to compete against, because we're able to work with people who really need to take a jump and a jump again in order to make sure that they're able to get the jobs that we know are coming. I think, though, back to what was just said, these ideas have to be scalable. And that's where you should all read the plan and figure out all together how we make these things actually happen. Because pilots are nice, and when I talk about these 7 women who are going to be at the James, this is great, major impact on those lives. But it is such a tiny drop in the bucket. And it can't just be the United Way. It can't just be the Workforce Development Board. It can't just be the PASS Foundation. That the only way what the recommendations for that report get established and actually become part of the fabric of the community is if everybody where they sit is helping to make that happen.
And the Rise Together Innovation Hub will be staffed, and so positions will be announced soon. Small staff, but be thinking about, are you that thought leader who could help make this work in our community?
Hi, Josh Harrison with Improving. Lisa, you mentioned that in Columbus we have a high rate of poverty and a talent gap at the same time. It seems to me that institutions become that bridge to help us get there. So outside of K-12, what can we invest in to help these institutions change or get better? Or what institutions would those be?
You're asking both Lisas, right?
Yes, yeah, sure. Everyone on the panel.
Because she might have a better answer.
I disagree.
Yeah, no.
Well, here's what I think, and then you can disagree with me, maybe.
Okay.
So the way to do that is when we talk about stackable credentials, and we talk about getting credentials that are in a short period of time, that then you can get to work, or earn and learn situations, which are apprenticeship or apprenticeship-like. So people, which is also what's going on in this pilot. This is a great pilot.
It's an awesome pilot.
So, right, they got their first credential, they're going to work, the James is going to pay for that second credential, and within 12 weeks, they'll have been working, earning money, a paycheck, and that's really the way to go. So I know that our community college, Columbus State, and I'm not going to talk about the 4-year institutions because that's something different. But we look at career tech and vocational programs. We look at Columbus State. It's getting stackable credentials that lead people to work now as if you need a degree, you can earn the degree as you go along, but being able to get that in a compressed amount of time and get working so that you're making the money that you need. I'm a huge fan of apprenticeship. We're looking at that on the board as to how we could make that work in a lot of ways that are outside of the trades, that any industry can become an apprenticeship embracer. It's just a matter of figuring out how someone who's learning isn't a cost center for a company, but can be make a profit center, I guess, while they're learning. And that's a challenge, but I think it can be done. And the other thing I would say is we need to get to a system that is not what I consider, I'll say, person and seat, but competency. So if I'm going to get a degree in, you name it, IT, I'm in this class for as long as I need to be to learn it, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a semester. I move to the next concept and then to the next concept so that I'm able to complete that degree quicker. And we have one school doing that, high school, right? Metro is still doing that. And that kind of learning is how we can get people more quickly what they need to know and then into the job that earns them the living wage. That's what I think, but okay.
Well, and Josh is a board member of Columbus State's foundation. So, it is an amazing asset for our community.
Doug, before you start with your question, I just want to highlight to everybody at your table, there's this QR code. We're really interested in what you think about the future of work and what your thoughts are. So if you could scan it and share your thoughts, we'd really appreciate it. Floor is yours, Doug.
Good afternoon. Doug Arsenault with the Central Ohio Transit Authority. First of all, what an incredible panel. This is one of the best CMCs I've ever been to, and great moderation from COTA board member Mike Stevens. Shout out to that.
You're the best, Doug. You're the best.
So bravo, CMC and Smart Columbus for putting this together. The transportation sector is one of the industries that is fastly evolving, upgrading, if you will. COTA has a great apprenticeship program in our vehicle maintenance department that's doing some really cool stuff. But I would love to get your thoughts on the transportation sector and workforce.
So we know one of the sectors from our initial, some of the initial research that has been done is that mass urban transit is going to be a sector that's increasing here. Hopefully, maybe not fast enough. And that's so important in two ways, right? I mean, there's what kind of buses are you going to have? You're going to need a driver. Are they going to be all electric? What does that mean in a whole host of ways for keeping those buses up? Or smaller transportation. I saw Aislinn in here somewhere. So, what are you going to be doing? But also, even more importantly, is how people who don't or can't own their own transportation, how that will get them to the jobs that they want to work in so that they can live where they want to live, wherever that is in Central Ohio, and then get to work in a reasonable amount of time wherever that is. And so I think that is why we've got to be really focused on transportation, mass transportation, or other ways of transporting people to jobs and to live their lives, basically.
I would also, I want to answer on this as well. So I think that the other thing that we have to think about as it relates to how we encourage people to want to have careers in the transportation industry is very, very broad. If you think about all the possibilities that are tied to transportation, it's really, really difficult to get folks jazzed about that when they're young, because they can't figure it out. They see COTA, they see city bus. What does that have to do with me, right? Even if I'm a regular rider, do I want to have some role or some job possibility or some career option in this space? We have to pull these industries apart, whether it's transportation or it's healthcare or anything else, and we have to really pull it apart and show folks, whether they're young or folks that are transitioning in their work, where and how the opportunity that industry has is not what they thought that it was, right? Go back to old school manufacturing, right? Manufacturing today doesn't look anything like it used to. Transportation today and tomorrow, nothing like it used to, and yet we're not telling that story in such a way that gets folks just completely enamored with, hey, let's go do that thing.
So you have a great opportunity. People ride your buses to do a marketing campaign to show all the cool things you can do in the transportation industry. So go back and tell Joanna that.
All right, I'm going to jump in. We've got 5 minutes, and we've got 3 individuals who stole in line there, so I'm going to challenge the panel.
Stop talking.
Brief responses.
Got it.
Hi, I'm Doreen Whitley-Rogers. I'm with Esri, a geospatial strategist on the team. I'm also a former New York City public school teacher. I sit on the board of a charter school here in Columbus, and I also teach in the construction trade college at Columbus State. And I share that because my question is about teachers specifically. How do we target and equip teachers with what they need to prepare this new workforce, specifically those that are working with the most vulnerable populations in our community?
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. We wrestle with that every single day, to be perfectly honest with you, right? And the 2 big takeaways, I guess, that I would argue that the past team would probably echo are that we don't provide enough space inside of the existing system that is K-12, whether it's the traditional K-12 public system or our charter schools, for teachers to be and experience innovation. right? And the reality is our teachers are an amazing workforce. These folks typically went into this industry because they want to impart amazing things on these malleable minds, right? And our teachers are incredibly creative, but they don't have the space they need to be creative. That's one. And then the second takeaway is that we need to enmesh and emerge teachers very, very early on in the industry conversations about what is it that you need, right? This is a question about outcomes. And teachers are ready, but they have to have the space to be able to participate.
How's it going? Mike Petrarca with Brooksource, and my main question was, there's been a lot of talk from all the panelists about, tech cred, apprenticeships, and the micro-credentialing, which is great, but what are we doing to influence, either policy with the employers in town, or even kind of changing the mindset for, the people making the decisions, right? Even if the policy is there, what are we doing to kind of change the stigma that when you're comparing folks with these micro-credentialings or apprenticeship experience versus that traditional degree, how are we changing that mindset at that level of involvement rather than just maybe leadership or the minimum qualifications?
I think the way to do that is there are examples of people who are doing it that way, and I think at this point, the only way to get that across is to have those people stand in front of other people and say, look, this is what I did, this is how I got it. And look where I am now. We're doing that right now in the trades, right? Finding, for example, we need more women, finding women who were in the trades or are in the trades now, took that step, and to tell their story about how it's been for them. I'd like to see these young women in another year be able to stand in front of other people in our program that covers 16 to 24-year-olds to say, look, this is what I was able to do. Here's the time. Here was the benefit to me. Here's where I'm going. Because we can talk about, the need to explain to parents, stop telling your kids, you have to go to college, that's it. If you don't, we failed as parents somehow. We can do that and have been doing that until we're blue in the face for the last 3 years for sure, since I've been at the board. I think the only way really to change minds is to take people who are doing it and put them in front of kids and young adults, and B, in front of those parents if you have to say, look, I'm telling you, here I am, here's what I'm making. Here's what I'm doing. Here's how I'm loving my life.
All right, we got one last question. Carl, you're it. Bring us home.
My name is Carl Lee, and I'm working with Smart Columbus as a South Linden liaison. I'm also the chair of the IEEE section here in Columbus, Ohio, which is the Industry of Electric and Electronic Engineering. We have humanitarian STEM programs, the IEEE, that we want to bring into the urban schools, but there's a barrier whether they really have STEM programs in these schools, especially in the Linden area, that they are claiming to be STEM schools. So when we go into, I retired from teaching at DeVry in 2015, so I've been around here a while, and I did a lot of substitute teaching in those schools, specifically those schools in the Linden area, which I live in, and there's a barrier to really bring some STEM programs in there, even if we bring the resources. And they have these little robotic classes that they throw once a year,
Carl,
or something like that.
I need you to ask your question. Thank you.
My question is, how is there any kind of plan to deal with those middle school and high school students with these STEM programs that don't have technology or engineering in those schools?
That's a loaded question, Carl. So the answer though is it's a complex, right? The part of the problem, I'll go back to something I said earlier, right? We are not allowing for space inside of our K-12 spaces for a variety of innovations to be effective, right? So if we can't step back and take a moment to figure out who these kids in these schools are and what they're passionate about, right? What their aspirations are going to be so that we can tailor to that, we're just going to continue to keep teaching the same canned curriculum that doesn't work, right? We have a systems problem here from the K-12 perspective. And until we can get the system to shift, so, back to the question we had earlier, right? Who should be teaching and instructing in those spaces, right? Teachers in sort of a modern area, I would argue, are facilitators of learning. Awesome that you've got some content knowledge, we need that. But the reality is we need people from the community, people from industry with lots and lots and loads of experience to come in and stand side by side with us to inspire kids to be in that space. These specialty programs, whether it's STEM or anything else, struggle inside of those highly structured, canned environments that don't allow for innovation.
I hope you found today's forum as enjoyable as I did. There's a lot to think about here. And let's thank our sponsors, BDO and Regionomics. And of course, our speakers, Lisa Patt-McDaniel, Annalies Corbin, Lisa Courtice, and Michael Stevens. Well done, Michael. And our special thanks to all of you. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. It says next week, but in 2 weeks. There's no forum next week. Thank you.